Do you use counting boards with your students or child? They come in very different formats, ranging from commercially made wooden frames or plastic counting boards like this one, or digital apps that allow you to change the starting and the finishing number, or even just printed hundreds boards on card or on paper like this one. Regardless of their size and shape, they all typically start with 1 and end on 100. In this episode, we'll explore ways you can use a 1 to 100 counting board like this. And I'll also show you another counting board that is still used in classrooms today that I believe is responsible for a common misconception. Now, I like to keep things simple, so the hundreds board I'm going to use in this episode looks like this. And there's no excuses for not using one because I'm going to provide a free one in the links. So what are the prerequisites the students must have before they use a hundreds board? Well, they need to be able to count from 1 to 100. And depending on the type of activities you do with it, they may also need to be able to read and write numbers to 100. Now, this board is simply an extension of the number track, which is usually the first row of the board. And a number track is one of the first experiences young students will have with the length model for teaching numbers. And there are other models too, but that's a topic for another episode. I wrote this book with Calvin Irons. It's called The Hip Hop Hippos, and we use it to introduce number tracks to very young children. Let me share just a few pages with you. The Hip Hop Hippos. The hippos made a clever track to help them hop forward and back. How many tiles are there? What do you suppose they're going to do with them? Holly hops to number 1. Now her fun has just begun. Here she is on number 1. How far do you think she can hop? Harry Hippo hops to 4. What number is just before? Holly is on number 3. If she hops 2 more, where will she be? On number 7, there's loads of laughter. What numbers come just before and after? So I won't ruin the ending for you, but if you listen carefully, you can hear my language was bringing out the idea of relative position. What's the position of 8 relative to 10? It is 2 just before 10. And believe it or not, we use the idea of relative position to do a lot of calculations, particularly with addition and subtraction, in our head. And if you want to know specific examples from me, leave me some questions in the comments. After reading the story, you can have your students make their own hands-on or concrete number track using connecting cubes. And you may need to write some numbers on there for them. And once they have that in their hands, they can use that to answer some questions you might give them. What number comes immediately after 5? What number is just before 3? What numbers come before 7? There's many of them, obviously. Or what numbers come between 4 and 8? If I start at 4 and jump forward 3, where do I finish? Afterwards, you can have your students make their own pictorial number track that goes beyond 10. I've made one here and I place it on a cardboard roll, and because it's a length model, it works as a kind of measuring tape, if you like. Now imagine if you had a very large one of these that goes all the way to 100. I can place them around the 4 corners of my classroom, and over time I can use this to ask questions that focus on the idea of relative position. Boys and girls, what number comes immediately after 5? What number comes just before 35? Then one day, after having it on the walls for many months, you can pull that number track down and work with your students to cut it into strips like this. They are strips of 10, therefore they are decades. And when you rearrange it like this, you can see what's happening. we are making a hundreds board right before their eyes. So engaging students in making their own hundreds board is far more meaningful and memorable than simply giving them one. So what can you do once you've had it made? Talk about its structure. For example, you could ask, where are all the numbers that have a 0 in the ones place? Where are all the even numbers? What pattern do they make? What do you notice about the numbers that appear along this diagonal? What do you notice about the numbers that appear along this diagonal? After they have learned the structure of the hundreds board, you can cut one up into smaller pieces to make a jigsaw. I've cut mine up into 10 pieces and I think that's enough. As they work to put them back together, it makes them think about what number is 1 before, what number is 1 after, and that gets them thinking this way across the hundreds board. But also gets them thinking about what number is 10 after and 10 before, and that gets them thinking up and down this way. So it's reinforcing place value. You can also give them activities like this, where they need to write the missing numbers within the hundreds board. And it comes from a popular series I wrote called The Think Tank. As they move up the grade, students can use a hundreds board to explain their thinking strategies for adding and subtracting. For example, if I start on 36 and add 3, how do I move my counter? To the right, because I'm counting on 3 ones. If I start at 36 and add 20, how do I move my counter? I tend to move it down 2 rows or 2 tens rather than counting out 20 individual ones. But if I start at 36 and add 23, how do I move my counter? Almost every person I ask says they move it down first and then across. This means you prefer to add the tens first, then the ones, even though you've probably been trained to add the ones first. And have you ever asked yourself, why is the number 1 in the top left-hand corner? We tend to give instructions with hundreds boards along the lines of, start at 1 and count up to 50. Count up to 50, and yet we're going down the board. That seems odd. In real life, things tend to go up if they become greater or bigger. The liquid in the glass goes up the glass as the amount increases. The tree grows taller as it gets older. So it might be good to give students experiences with what we call a reverse hundreds board, and I provided a free one in the links for you. I like this because it provides a connection to a coordinate grid where the number 1 is in the bottom left-hand corner, and they will need to learn about coordinate grids later in elementary or primary school. Now for that alternative counting board, which I sometimes see in schools from various parts of the world, and it's called a 0 to 99 board. Some teachers insist on using a board like this because they like to stress the patterns that are unique to this arrangement. Unfortunately, they are also creating a misconception about 0. By showing 0 on the board, you are giving it the same space as every other number. As I said, this is an extension of the number track. If the 0 has a space, then it has the same value as the other numbers. But 0 has no value, and therefore you cannot count that space. If you're determined to use this board, then you need to cut off the 0. It's as simple as that, and now you have a board that's technically correct. So this is what I want you to do. 1, forget about the 0 to 99 board. You simply don't need it. 2, use the counting boards and the links I provided and engage your students in thinking about relative position, or get them to explain their thinking when they add and subtract. And finally, if you've seen value in today's episode, then give me a thumbs up, add some useful comments, and subscribe today so you don't miss another learning opportunity with me. See you next time.